If there's anything you could change in the current norm of society, what would it be? Definitely, I would change the fact that gender is such a thing of contestation. Today it's my gender, tomorrow it's sexuality, tomorrow it's ableism, tomorrow it's another identity factor.
And one may argue that there's always been power struggles in the academy, and it's not particularly unique to women.
And then also now, if you look at the Black society, right? Also, statistically, Black women are more graduates. Where are Black men statistically?
Was on disrupting the system.
Yeah.
So I will state it as I did earlier. So what happens when leaders do not particularly inherit institutional cultures but choose to be disruptive?
They don't inherit problematic institutional cultures.
I mean, by virtue of what you wrote in the article, all of these institutions are somewhat toxic in their own way because they are all grounded on this patriarchal system.
Patriarchal racist system, yeah. So I wonder, what are the things that make one disruptive? You're disruptive because you want to change the order. But where cultures of belonging are concerned, you're disruptive because you are not included or you don't feel like you belong.
Yeah.
So disruption often has legitimacy. So oftentimes people who disrupt are not going to disrupt a thing where they find expression in this space. And you must also be careful where disruption is concerned, because sometimes you're disruptive for selfishness or greed. So think about how there are scholars who have capitalized decolonial thought, and they themselves in their own day-to-day scholarship are not really decolonial. They are just simply doing it because that's what's selling. Universities will hire you if that's what you talk about, you know. And there are some scholars also who are writing on feminist literature and Africanization, and they're not necessarily people who not necessarily believe in that, but what they're writing is not really that. They just use it as buzzwords. So there are different kinds of disruptors, and not all disruptions are noble disruptions. In a case like that, ideally a university must kick you out. So for me, I think of part of, because I study African women, and I don't reduce African women to people in the home, but I think of them as how would they be like in a home? And so what is home? And even in a home, you can find a black sheep.
Yeah, there always is.
You know what I mean? And sometimes there's no logic to why the black sheep is doing black sheep things. You know? And so we need to be careful that oftentimes when you are disruptive, you are not doing black sheep behavior.
Yeah.
And you are disruptive for a purpose of it. And you can see the legitimacy of which is why we should all know that fees must fall is a legitimate cause. How that is articulated at different times might not necessarily be aligned to the legitimacy of fees must fall. So burning a building or burning a residence with students in might not be aligned with the legitimacy of the must fall movement. But the must fall movement itself is a legitimate cause, right? So not all disruptions, to be fair, would be disruptions that are aligned or justified, and that happens. That happens in any context. Yeah.
Okay. Let's now go back to leadership, and I want us to particularly zoom into women. Let's forget about men. Let's forget about patriarchy. let's look at women of color. Would you say that they are treated in the same way as they are? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Would you say that women of color are treated the same way as their white counterparts? That is, white women in the workplace. And I want you, in answering this, I would like you to think about guys that are in the leadership positions within higher education. Would you say that your female VCs receive the same treatment as your black VCs, for instance, or directors, whatever?
Yeah, the white female VCs versus the black female VCs. So here's what I think about it. Whiteness does two things, and there's a lot of people who could argue about it. And I've heard quite a couple of male decolonial scholars or African scholars. Some of them center race as an integral or as the leading component of oppression. But if you remember when I said at first that the first wave and the second wave of feminism comes because white women are having issues within their households as white people. So I think of it to myself that the way the world is organized by whiteness is white men on top, white women at the bottom, black men and black women.
In that hierarchy.
In that order. The world is organized for a white heterosexual male. Everything else falls under, including white women, which tells me that gender is much more leading than race. So what then happens is that if a white woman is a vice chancellor in a previously colonial university that is untransformed, the white woman is going to deal with sexism from her male counterparts. When a black woman is a vice chancellor in a previously colonial university, she's going to deal firstly with sexism and then secondly with racism from her female counterparts too. Because whiteness will band together. If it must, it will band together. But white women know that sexism is a very serious issue. So I can't think of it outside of patriarchy. I think patriarchy first, then sexism.
Okay.
And when they need to be used together, they will be used together. Whiteness will always bend together if they have to bend together. And so even in the cases where if a white woman is in charge, do not be shocked if she talks about sexism, because whiteness is sexist. That's why they had to have feminist movements. They were not having feminist movements against all men in the world. They were not saying Indian men are taking our jobs. They were saying my husband doesn't allow me to vote. So even the way marriage is constructed, it's a white thing. From the property, that's why your father must walk you down the aisle, from the property of the father to the property of the husband. White societies were always patriarchal. So white women are always going to deal with sexism. If there's any group of people that can tell you about patriarchy, it's actually white women.
Damn.
But the thing about them is that they will choose their community of whiteness over choosing a community with African women. And that is where we clash as African feminists with white feminists. Yeah.
But understandably so, I guess, because that's the system that they are used to. It's been created for them. It works for them. So it wouldn't be easy for them to now breach into. I mean, you do find a few Princess Dianas, but it can't be.
Look, you also find progressive white women as well. You see, I think this becomes a challenge in African society because sometimes for us, oppression is oppression. I don't have to bend with you because of race and because of language. Dude, you are being oppressive, you know? and I've heard that as a conversation, like just regular talk in my peers, to say, when are we going to decide to put all the other identity markers aside and choose us as a race or as a culture and say, look, Black people, we need to come together. And unfortunately, and that's the thing, I was reading something. Where did I find this thing? I was reading something where someone said, I was at a conference where someone said, the problem with Pan-Africanism. It was a seminar that was hosted by the Saatchi Chair in Gender, Sexualities, and African Queer Studies. And someone there said, Pan-Africanism is bended against anti-homosexuality. So when sometimes Pan-Africanists say, let's go back to the old Africa. The old Africa is an Africa where men are only sleeping with women. They'll say, but homosexuality is not African. So part of the tension with us aligning as Africans is because we legitimize oppressions in our ideologies. White women can ignore the sexism oppression and choose the community of whiteness. Black Africans don't necessarily do that because it's a life and death. It's the very same case where we are sitting here saying, how do we as South African queer people go to Uganda in peace? How must I say I want to travel the continent and I must walk into Uganda, but I could die? You know what I mean? So I'd rather go to Europe where I won't die because of my sexuality. I might die because of racism. So those are the tensions with Africans, is that part of how we have imagined our identities is that we have created intolerance as culture. So what I mean by that is to say, it's okay if Ugandans believe that homosexuality is not their culture.
It's not okay.
It's okay if you think that, right? You don't have to kill homosexuals. You don't have to kill them. You don't have so you don't have to be inhumane in saying it's okay to say I prefer New Balance and I think Nike is overrated. So yeah, I think homosexuality is overrated. Heterosexuality is the way to go. Manje, why are you killing people? Now every time I see everyone wearing a Nike, I must steal their Nikes and burn them. Why? So why does your preference involve ignoring the humanity of another?
Yeah.
For me, that's where I'm like, I'm calling it bullshit. Yeah. There's no African principle that involves you ignoring the humanity of another person. Then that's not African at all. Yeah. If I have to be a purist, I will be a purist on that point.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to any African ideology that involves killing other people because they are not like us. Chase them out.
Yeah.
Kill. It's fine. Then you become a Uganda that you are just Ugandan heterosexuals. That's okay. But when you put it in a system, you go and debate in parliament, and you put it as a law that, in fact, if we find you, we will kill you.
Because the reason why I say we shouldn't even say it's okay is because if such is accepted,
right,
it means that in the next couple of years, if not now, we will be seeing the very same parliamentarians.
Yeah.
Sorry, the term is for you, not me.
Yeah.
We will see the very same people normalizing women staying at home, being servants to their husbands or their male counterparts.
Yeah. And for me, and this is what's so hilarious about it, and I'm like, this is the most whitest thing ever.
Yes.
So relegating women to specific roles and saying because whiteness is very heterosexual as well. So these things that you think are African, I'm like, okay. So we have a crisis in Africa where much of our history is undocumented. and undocumented across, orally written, all of that. Secondly, much of our history was stolen, if not destroyed. 3, there are, of course, ways in which you can trace history, but to what extent can you go far back, right? And when you go far back, to what extent is that tainted and not tainted? So I'll make an example with Xhosa manhood initiation. So sorry about that, with Xhosa manhood initiation, and how so red ochre imbola is a very, very historically African Xhosa practice. Yeah, but wearing of imbola, and that has continued the test of time, and I think that that's remarkable. So when you think about the fact that when a boy comes from a mountain, the boy must be dressed in a particular clothing to symbolize manhood. That's usually your brown khaki clothing. It's a brown pants, formal shoes. That's very Western.
That sounds like my farming uniform.
Right? Right? And it's a cap and it's a what. And when you look at like old Englishmen, that sort of also models that. Of course, we can trace this back to missionaries and all of that. But also, do you then say that's historically Xhosa culture, that men would come from the mountain and they would wear formal pants and shirts and stuff like that? Or do you say that we've caught up with time and this is the dress we want to incorporate as part of our culture? So when you go far back, what are the things you are willing to accept that are not authentically your culture? You must be honest about that. These are not authentically our culture, but these are things that we wish to incorporate because culture has shifted. But when your culture involves saying, this is not African and we're going back to our African roots, and it involves killing, and I'm like, that's sort of what Europeans and Americans were doing.
Yeah.
And you think that that is true African, and I'm like, this is the most whitest things I have seen.
Yeah.
And then the Western countries then say you are backwards, and then you get offended, and I'm like, believe the Westerners when they say you are backwards, because it's their culture. When Westerners say something is backwards, believe them. It's what they used to do. Believe it. They have stopped doing it now, and now they've made themselves custodians of saying things are backwards. So if I hear Westerners saying something is backward, I'm like, it's because your ancestors used to do this. I believe it. I believe it. I don't think of it as it's not an offense to me, you know. But so the challenge with Africans as people who subscribe to African identity, and unfortunately, I'm always going to fight with African men. I'm committed to that. These people are my community. So if I must fight feminism with African men until I join my ancestors, I'm absolutely committed to that. I'm not interested, which is why I don't identify with liberal feminism, with white feminism. I don't go to conferences to fight white people and what they think in the world. That's not the people I want to work with. I will rather work with the problematic African and fight, even if we don't agree, but fight until maybe we reach certain points of consensus, because that's my community. I'm committed to fighting in my community, with my community, for my community. And it looks messy. It looks messy, but that is my commitment. But I'm not going to fight alongside you if your idea of being African means we must kill other Africans because I'm not involved in how they do intimate things. And now, because I'm uncomfortable with how Mang Mang does intimate things and I want to see how they do intimate things, because why are you involved in how other people do intimate lives? Why are you so fixated with how people do intimate lives? So I'm not going to subscribe to a Pan-Africanist ideology that involves us killing people because I don't like that. Or I think that that's wrong. And so what? If you think that's wrong, erase it. It's like in school they teach you that's a wrong answer, take a rubber, erase it. And move on, write the right thing. But that's your own personal issue. That's your own personal issue. So, and those are the tensions. Whereas I think white communities I don't know how those people figured it out. And I don't know how those people figured it out to say, if the cost is whiteness, we must choose whiteness against anything else, you know. That's maybe a lesson we must learn from whiteness, that if the cost is Africanness, I must be willing to be contradictory to myself. And I'm willing to be contradictory to myself. I'm not involved in believing, in subscribing to Western things when the cost is to Africanness. But I'm not going to choose Africanness if it's dehumanizing to Africanness. I'm not going to do that. You can call me anything you want to call me in the world under the sun. I couldn't care less. I'm not moved by that. I'm not going to kill people and say this is in the spirit of being African. I don't subscribe to a way of life where killing is how I must live.
You do know that I've once worked in a Pan-African Institute, right?
Yes.
So I'm sitting here and I'm like, what do you think of us? I'm just thinking we have a Pan-African parliament here in South Africa. Somewhere in Joburg, I think.
Yes.
And where I was working in the Pan-African Institute, there was so many of us. 4 were senior researchers, all male. The director was male. Every female was in an administrative position. It's just coming back to me now as you say this. But what's your thought on Pan-Africanists? I don't think it was anyway. Maybe
one of the earliest. I'm shocked I never left the academy after this. One of the first conferences I attended was a Pan-Africanist thing. Pan-Africanist ideology, mostly Azanian. So much more rooted in South Africa. Black consciousness, school of thought, sort of community of scholars. And I was at the time speaking about gender and rape, and I was specifically speaking about rape against Black women and where that happens in the township, who's raping us in the township. Kisipho, ke qinisani.
Aye.
Hase John, hase Mark, hase Gerte. And I was like, let's name it. Let's do that. Who Spazi gets raped? Who's the raper? You know, it's my next door neighbor. It's my brother Luvuyo. It's not somebody there. Even if it's somebody there, it's Kisipho, it's Hepo. It's not Gert. It's not Yaku. It's not Mang Mang. And I got a tongue lashing about how historically I must remember that Black men were violated and dehumanized. And I'm like, can't you were Black women when this was happening, right? Where were Black women during colonialism? And because, yes, I agree that Black men were dehumanized. I also agree that I'm being violated by Black men. And I continued to go into those circles like it can be 2-3 years. And I was very young. You know, I love my young self. I gave 0 shits. Like, I love my young self. I continue to go back, and I remember someone saying to me, after the 3rd time this conferencing was happening, I wasn't there. And someone said to me, you know, I was there and your name was mentioned. And the incident was mentioned, and basically the consensus from this group was to say majority male. The consensus from the group was to say, we don't need that kind of thinking here. We don't need those kinds of problematic Black women here. And I was like, oh, okay. And I stopped going to them, and I found African feminist spaces where I can have debates and argue with you about intergenerational feminism. I can argue about ageism within the academy and the feminist space with old or senior Black women academics. And we are arguing and we are respecting each other's arguments, you know, for the legitimacy of where they are, correcting each other where necessary. And I'm saying this to also acknowledge that it's not always glamorized, but the African feminist community for me, as an academic community, has been one of the safest. In the sense that even when there were serious tensions, we found ways to get back to each other. You know, where we've been hurt as younger academics, where we've hurt the senior academics, we've found ways to reconcile, which is why I will always be committed to the community, at least of African feminist scholars that I've interacted with in South Africa specifically, because I've seen that thing happen. And it changes the dynamics, but I've seen we will come back together.
That's how we grow.
That's how we grow. And so I realized, I left, I was like, this is not a space for me to grow. This is not a space where people can say, Spazi, we've heard you. This is what we think. And how can we work towards this? Because what you said feels problematic to us. It's you saying, hi, how can you say Konisani is a rapist? Sure. Spazi, how can we work towards that? I don't want my name associated with this thing you're talking about. What can we do from our positioning, or what should we do as a community? You know, so I don't know. Pan-Africanism, that's why I don't subscribe to Pan-Africanism, because I was like, I don't think it works for me. Whoever it works for, sure. I read some Pan-Africanist scholars as well. Some of their work. The same community of guys, great scholars. Like, I won't name them now, but they're great. They're prolific in their own fields. But I've just distanced myself, and I was fortunate enough to find a community where I could do the difficult work with. You know,
I don't know if I would say they are as great as you allude. But I just think they're protecting this patriarchal agenda that is not advancing society in any way, if anything.
But here's the trick. Here's the thing. And you and I will know this. Most of these Pan-Africanists that we have in mind were all trained in Europe.
Of course.
And do you see where my point is? Do you see where my point is? Do you see where my point is? Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Supposed African scholars trained in Europe or in America, prolific, and you look at the ways, their mannerisms and their culture of doing things, and that is Pan-Africanism, and you're sitting there thinking,
that's a very important point to make.
The thing you must always try to do when you sometimes follow scholars, look where they train.
But also you look at where they source the funds from.
Where they source the funds from, where they're citing, who was their supervisors or their promoters.
I think this is brilliant.
And what I think for me, one of the best things is that I was trained at Nelson Mandela University. We don't have that culture. At least I have not seen that culture dominant in those ways. I haven't seen that. So the type of products the university will produce are all different. You can't. So you can hear someone who's gone to NMU. If they speak about humanizing pedagogy, the way they think about transformation, but you can't always pinpoint certain schools of thought to them. It's quite diverse, which I think the university must appreciate, that it has decentered its schools of thought. You know, you get but there's a rootedness that it's trying to get. We want a very Africanized sort of scholar. But just because you are a Ngugi wa Thiong'o scholar and I'm a Tsitsi Tangaremba scholar, we don't all have to be Achebe scholars. You know, we can be different scholars, but we are rooted all in Africa. And I think that's the beauty of it. Oftentimes, these scholars are trained political scientists, trained in traditional philosophy, you know, and it's the very Eurocentric training and schools of thought that they still stick to. And I'm just like, what the hell is Pan-African about the thing you're doing, besides you being Sporazitau And I've added my clan name at the end of my surname to be, I don't know, to connect with my ancestors. Okay, there are others who've done this and they're great. But yeah, so I'm like, what's actually Pan-African? So if I look at your citation, what's Pan-African about it?
I don't want to personalize this because you know my story in Pan-Africanism. You know my history with Pan-Africanists. But do you feel that where one sources their funding, and now this is in the context of Pan-Africanists. Sorry, we are shifting away from the main theme. But do you think...
but it's about the colonialism of the university.
Do you think that influences the output of what they would be publishing, their research?
It's going to influence the output of what you and I will produce also. And I learned this trick from someone, is to say, okay, you get the funding from here. You curate your report the way the funder needs the report to be curated. The same way you curated your proposal to what the funder said they want to see, right? Curate the report so for the funder, but figure out how can you do your work within those things. I don't think the academy is not as rigid in terms of how you can play. And no, if you are a traditional discipline scholar, you're going to have very difficulties doing the things you want to do within the limitations of your funder. But if you're a transdisciplinary or an interdisciplinary scholar, you won't have a problem with figuring out, okay, so the funder needs to see this and this and this. How can I do this but still do parts of my thing? How can I ensure my identity is still there? Yeah. Or just be like, this is not really what I believe in, but I've got the funding and I've got a student who does this work. Let's see how the student can do it.
Yeah.
And I don't have to do it. You don't always have to be married to things or harbor things. Just be like, oh, maybe I can shift this thing here or do it this way. But that works when you are truly transdisciplinary or open to that. You can always find a way to make it work. But you are going to have to give your funder the type of output they want because they're funding you. The best thing to do, the great thing we have in the country is like the NIHSS that is very, very committed to African humanities.
Yeah.
There now you can say I can do African work freely. Of course, critical African work freely. So, and you might have to say, for these 3 years of my life, I'm going to go with these funders, these types of funders, and I'm going to figure out how to manipulate the work. And then as I move on, I'm going to do my work. I was once at a decolonial summer school and Prof. Oyoronke Oyewumi was there. And she was saying, you can do two things in your career. You can say, I'm going to do what the funder wants, and I'm just going to do this work. And eventually, when I'm done with the PhD, I'll do all the things I want to enjoy. Most scholars do that. The second one is to say, I'm going to do what I want to do at any and all costs. I'm not going to change myself and wait for later. Because you're going to get tired by the time you get to later. Or you might not get to later. You might not get to later. And those are the decisions you have to make. After that, I was like, I'm going to decide to do my thing, to do me. And if me doesn't work within the academy, I will leave the academy. I will leave the academy. I'm not married. Clearly, my ancestors can't be limiting the work that they need me to do to one space.
Yeah.
If the academy is not working for it, I just go to another space.
And I think that's important.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people don't look. The other thing about the academy is that in order for you to be a professor, you have to have shown. You don't become a professor of everything. You become a professor of the specialization and stuff like that. And if you want to be a professor in the traditional ways, you can do that. But I've seen other professors become professors linked to their field, but with a different kind of specialization. Your career will do well. If you follow your heart, your career will meet you there. And I want to be an academic in the traditional ways. Really, really love that. But I don't do traditional disciplinary things. And I think I'll get there. If I don't, then it's their loss. It's their loss. Yeah.
I always see myself as one of those academics that are problematic.
Okay.
Problematic in that I don't want to be known as a professor who specializes in one thing.
Yeah.
The world is so big. There's so much to play with.
Yeah.
I don't want to be known as somebody who is a guru in producing plants and it ends there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what I want for my life. And I just never want that. So transdisciplinarity for me makes so much sense. Because it means you are able to see the world and make contributions in different ways.
And learn from other spaces
and
too.
learn from other spaces.
Like being an expert is, okay. I know a physician, this physician, who studied physics, I think the traditional ways, but is from Venda and studied maths and science in the indigenous language. And now they are also working on understanding science in indigenous languages. So, but this is like, in terms of like physics in the continent, they are ranked as high. So how are you able to, like, physics is very physics. So how are you still able to do that and be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary? Definitely the possibility is there. It's absolutely possible. You don't have to be stuck in this one way of doing things and citing people. It's, to be fair, the old traditional way is the quickest way to make it. But the way the university is changing, the people who have to be on the selection panels and the promotions panels are different.
Yeah.
And if those people are different and you are a traditional disciplinary academic, you're not going to get promoted. Because you're also not valuable for the type of knowledge that universities need to produce right now. You can't produce the thing we were producing 20 years ago.
Yeah, no. Doesn't work.
You can't. And there are universities that will continue to do that, produce the old thing. But there are universities that are like, it's not going to work. And that's the university you must go find yourself in. The university that's saying the old thing is not working. We are working towards reimagining ourselves, but still staying as a university, or dismantling the idea of the university. That particular participant is in a interestingly old traditional university. The one was like, maybe we must do away with the university. And I was like,
I saw that.
Old traditional Afrikaner university. They were like, we must do away with this thing.
But then what does it mean? We do away with the university and then what?
Yeah. So that's what for me was very, very interesting. And that was someone who was trained as a teacher. So I thought that was very fascinating. They were a teacher and then they moved into a different discipline and stuff like that.
Okay. And then I think this will be my third last question.
Okay.
It's not on leadership, women leadership particularly, but it is on the way of practice in higher education, particularly in the classroom. Andragogy or pedagogy? Which one? Because when I was doing my undergrad, I remember this one time, my human ecology lecturer came and she just drew this table, column A and column B, andragogy, pedagogy. And then she wrote all the things under andragogy, what it means to follow an andragogical approach and pedagogical approach. One is for scholars in junior, secondary, and senior high schools. And the other is for university students, where when I am at varsity, I don't teach you. I lecture you. I facilitate lecture. How do we go about in disseminating information in our institutions of higher learning. Because some universities now speak of pedagogy. And if you look at what it is, the definition and where it should be applied, and Begi Koza, Prof. Begi Koza at UKZN writes about this. He makes this distinction that one is for schools and the other is more suited for adult learning. So why
pedagogy being more suited for school children?
Yes. Why are we bringing it to the
pedagogy
university setting?
Because basic education is not doing the thing it needs to do. That's no, like there's a nightmare. Have you taught first years? You're like,
oh God, I'm not going to comment.
Right? No, because honestly, so the education system in the country is not integrated well enough for us to be able to map out and say, when a student gets to university, I know they are ready with these types of things, you know. And those are like, because you know why? Basic education doesn't focus on critical thinking. They actually don't. At least in practice. I don't know what they do in terms of their lesson plans and but the practice in basic education is not critical thinking. Critical thinking in basic education happens if you are part of the debating society. If you are not, good luck. Critical thinking is what we expect you to do when we get to university, and you grapple with that as a lecturer. I was lecturing third years and I was grappling with, do not regurgitate the thing to me. Say it, use your own understanding. But also, I was teaching, I was joint lecturing with a postdoc fella with African statehood and political economy. And part of the things I was teaching was African economy from a gendered lens. And some things you'd hear is that African women have been relegated to domestic things, and. That's a basic argument. For third years, that's a basic argument. I need you to be critical of it. So because African women have been relegated to this is a result of colonialism. Part of being critical is to say colonialism endorsed a specific kind of institution, which became a legacy for institutions in Africa. You see this translate in the political systems of the continent. So who becomes president, who's in cabinet, that affects society. So if a child doesn't see themselves represented in parliament or see themselves represented in potentially the ballot paper, why do you think that's going to translate up there? Right? Yeah. Oh, that's a question.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I had the privilege of seeing the questions before you came here.
Which questions?
The questions.
Yeah.
Do you mind picking the second?
I don't know which one is the second. Is it numbered?
Both of them. You will see the one that you read. There's only two.
Okay.
And read out the second one.
Choose your favorite essay president and give reasons for your answer.
You don't have to. You don't particularly have to. But I'm just shocked because you're making this reference. You're talking about your students being able to choose their leaders and I'm just thinking that there's actually a question that
that's a beautiful question. That's a beautiful. So what I'll answer it just now. So I think that now I have to teach you critical thinking in university. Why do you think that happens? What do you think? So what was happening in the history class or social science class? Was it just that South Africa became South Africa the minute Jan van Riebeeck came? Or is the thing in class saying, because what we have to teach is to say, guys, Africa doesn't start at colonialism. We have to do this to 19 and 18-year-olds. Whereas these kids, since they were 13, they were being told South Africa started when Jan van Riebeeck got here. Now I must do critical thinking. So if Sporazi goes to your home and I say, this area is Khalishiwe, are you telling me that before I got there, you guys didn't know who you were? So why are you believing that South Africa started when a person walked in there and said, this is South Africa? And why has the schooling system been regurgitating the very same thing until matric? Now I get first years, and then this is a shock. And then others will say, yeah, but because of colonialism, we had roads. Of course, we were supposed to have roads at some stage.
That sounds like Helen Zille. That's something he said.
Right?
Said,
yeah, about how colonialism civilized us. But we were supposed to have roads at some stage. Of course, you were going to have roads. Of course, you were going to have some form of transport system. Whether it was 1950 or it was 2023, a country was going to have a particular system in place. Or say, the fact that Japan is competing with German engineering. Of course they must compete with German engineering because everyone wants German design.
Yeah.
So of course they were going to catch up with it. Cars were going to look different. And at some stage, cars are going to look other different. The Germans are probably looking at what the Japanese are doing and they're like, oh, there's some modeling system there we might have to implement. You're going to have to learn from each other as societies. Yeah. So I must teach critical thinking at varsity level. And now I must, and critical thinking is so difficult at varsity level because, and this is why pedagogy is important, because you must teach, because now I'm not only sitting with the schooling system, because the schooling system also teaches you that the teacher's right. Now I must fight with someone who believed that the teacher was right, and they're in my classroom and I'm saying, oh, I'm wrong. I think you're right. And now the student is shocked that I'm admitting to being wrong as the lecturer. And I must also sit with the home education system. I'm arguing with what this person's grandfather and grandmother taught them. So if the grandmother and the grandfather taught you that Black people are not people that have money, you are now confused that there's Matsepo sitting next to you and she also drove into the university with a Merc. Obviously, it has to be corruption. Her father is definitely in the ANC. That's why she has that money. I'm like, actually, your grandfather was also corrupt, by the way. That's why you have land. And you're like, no, but the land is our family land. Yes. Even the corruption money is our family money as a country. Like, so now when you walk into the classroom, you must deal with school knowledge, you must deal with home knowledge, and you must be teaching the person, you must think critically. Take all of these knowledges and develop your own individual one, but don't forget the other knowledges also matter. So you have to do pedagogy when you get to varsity, because the education system is not doing pedagogy. And some teachers will tell you. So I have a friend, an acquaintance who teaches sexualities at foundation phase level. They'll tell you that if a child in the classroom says, is Parazi who's 6 and Qinisani is also 6, and the child says, Qinisani is my husband. Now, because I asked them, when do you start teaching sexuality and sex to a child? They're like, the minute it emerges in the classroom. Oh, Qinisani and I are going to have 5 kids. Also, they know 2 people can bring children. But do they know the reproductive part of it? What happens when you see children dry humping on the school grounds? So when do you start teaching? And then the education system says, they are too young. So you don't teach critical thinking and certain things because they are too young. You don't teach debate in grade 6, they are too young.
Yeah.
Then you must be burdened by that at varsity. And so I think I'm inclined to believe with Dr. Beki, Prof. Beki, that perhaps, yes, pedagogy shouldn't be taught at varsity, but what do you do when that's what you get? My favorite president of South Africa.
You don't have to answer that one. It was just a by the way thing. You don't have to answer it because you answered the first one.
But for drama, my favorite president would have been Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. if they had elected her at that elective conference.
Why particularly NDZ?
NDZ, I think she did remarkable work at the AU when she was there, just thinking about, the African passport, how we need to be integrated as a continent. I was recently at a colloquium with her with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and she's now the Minister of Women,
and
Children and People with Disabilities, and she was former Home Affairs back in the day. She says they are doing a collaborative work project with Home Affairs, where Home Affairs is saying, look, there's a lot of children here who don't have birth certificates. The mothers go to Home Affairs and they are refusing to tell us who the fathers are. NDZ gets there and she says, so why do you think Sporas is going to tell you who the father of her child is, if the father of her child is probably her father or her uncle or her brother?
Oh, damn.
How do you think the mother must say, ubaba lo mntana ngumkhulu wakhe? So someone who's able to think like that, I was like, girl, you would have been my favorite president.
I would have assumed you would say at least Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka.
Oh, I didn't engage a lot with some of her stuff. Yeah, I didn't engage a lot with some of her stuff. Only later on. Yeah. Okay. But NDZ is very grassroots, and it's the simple thing. It's the practical thing. A child can't have a birth certificate because, and she's like, give the kids the birth certificates.
I respect both of them.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
Respect both of them.
Absolutely.
I think they've done phenomenal work outside South Africa.
Yeah. And it's sad that work is not translating in South Africa.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Phumzile continues to work outside South Africa.
Yeah, she does. She does. We recently hosted her as well.
I was there. The Sarah.
Yes.
Bratman, the lecture.
The Brigalia Bam lecture. Yes.
Where am I getting Sarah?
I don't know, but Sarah Bartman is also quite a notable individual. So thank you for knowing women in South African history.
Oh God,
Brigalia Bam.
I was there.
Yeah.
I just
come
moved
this side,
to PE, and it was a very.
Thanks for coming.
I loved it. Anyway, there's a woman there that I would love to meet, and she's a leader in her own right. I recently bought a book, Rape. Now you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You made mention of her earlier. Mind, I'm like, bring her here. I would love to have a chat with her, and I would love to continue this leadership conversation, especially with her sitting in that position. Prof. Gola, I believe.
She's actually getting an honorary dog, perhaps this week. At Stellenbosch University.
Nice. That is so nice.
And I mean, look, she's 51, so just incredible. One of the youngest African South Africans to be professor, and the work that she's done in that time, and she's only 51. So
she looks
absolutely
30. She looks 30.
I think the key is lifestyle. The key is lifestyle, but
I'm shocked.
Or genes,
honestly,
and genes.
Anyway, I appreciate you coming here. I think this has been an interesting conversation. I still have more questions, but in the interest of time, I'm looking at the hourglass. I think I think it's almost 1.5 hours now that we've been talking. I think we should cut here. If there is a need to continue, we will continue.
There's always a need to converse. There's always a need.
Please. I'm hoping that you are now going to be one of our friends.
Yeah.
So we will have a forum for the Friends of the Chronicles.
Yeah.
Called Friends of the Chronicles. And I'm hoping that you're going to be a part of that.
I'd be honored. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. This has been amazing.
My pleasure.
Thank you.